Hey, it's Bram Duffy. I'd like to welcome you back to class. The topic for today is small group communication. And as we'll see, it plays an essential role in shaping our relationships, our decision making abilities, and teamwork skills, both individually and as contributors to society. Think about all the times that you've been part of a group. Maybe you've worked on a group project in school or collaborated on a team at work, or maybe you joined a committee, some kind of community center thing. You know, these are examples of small group communication in action, and it's an integral part of your life. And at the same time, a lot of folks don't really enjoy participating in group activities. And so I want you to think about that. Are you one of those people? And researchers have a name for that kind of aversion to participating and working in groups, and it's called group hate. And group hate refers to this whole aversion to group work. And this dislike is something that sometimes just comes from past frustrations with groups that didn't function effectively. And you might have felt like totally exasperated by people that don't equally participate, where one person failed to pull their own weight, or maybe you've been in a group where decisions dragged on forever because no one could really agree. Or perhaps maybe the group avoided conflict altogether, and that's something that stalled the progress. And as members danced around, unresolved issues just sort of went unfixed. And so these challenges are real. And it's true that there's good news out there, because if you can understand the dynamics of small group communication, then you can learn to overcome some of these difficulties and then actually harness the many advantages that group work does. Now, what do we mean by small group communication? Simply put, it refers to the interaction among a small number of people who typically share a common goal and feel connected to one another and coordinate their behavior, working towards the same objective. And when we talk about a small group, we usually mean a group with 3 to 7 members. The size is ideal because it allows for meaningful interaction while still being manageable. If the group gets much larger, then discussions can become chaotic, and that becomes more difficult for everyone to participate actively. The benefits of small group communication can be incredibly significant. Research shows that effective communication in small groups is something that enhances productivity and improves individual performance. So, for students, working in the small groups often leads to better grades because collaboration really fosters high level thinking, and that helps with creativity. And both of those things, including the settings that they provide, mean that small groups have an option to um, really expand in their own creativity. So, whether you're brainstorming ideas for something with a group or analyzing complex data, skills that you get from uh, learning about group communication are transferable and essential. So, beyond work and academics, being able to collaborate in small groups impacts your personal growth, and it teaches us how to listen and respect other people's opinions and build a consensus sometimes. An important aspect of small group communication is having a shared purpose or a goal. And this purpose might come from external circumstances, like a manager asking a group to complete a task, or it could arise internally, where the members decide on their mission together. So you can imagine maybe a team of interns whose job it is to create some type of campaign, and their goal would be assigned by a manager. By contrast, if you have a group of friends that are starting a nonprofit book club, then that group together would decide what the group's goals are, and they would work to connect over the shared interests and do things like discuss thought-provoking literature, and these kinds of things add to the creative layers that can be offered there. And so shared goals do foster unity by giving the group a bit of clear direction. There's another key factor that makes groups effective, and that is a connection. Members of a small group must feel emotionally and socially connected. That connection forms the group's sense of identity, and it's vital for achieving collaboration. It also creates a feeling of interdependence, where each person recognizes that their contribution is something that matters. So, like if you picture a sports team that's working hard to win a championship game, each player relies on the others to perform at their best. And then that shared reliance increases their likelihood of success. So a strong sense of connection motivates members and builds trust. And all that lays the groundwork for open communication and a commitment to collective goals. Not all groups are the same, right? Then while all teams are small groups, not all small groups function as teams. And teams represent a special kind of small group that requires a higher level of commitment. Members of teams often possess complementary skills that add value to the group's overall ability, like a mix of strategic thinkers and creative innovators. Teams also tend to have a strong sense of collective identity, and that's something that helps them achieve high levels of commitment and also results. Um, a variation of small groups that has become increasingly common is the virtual small group. And that's something that involves members interacting primarily through electronic tools like email and video calls or collaborative platforms. And virtual work environments can range from an occasional digital meeting all the way through to have a fully remote team that has never even met in person. And so this degree of online interaction is referred to as virtuality. Virtuality. And it represents how much the group relies on digital communication. The virtual small groups face unique challenges like coordinating time zones and managing disparities in access to technology, and even bridging proficiency among different group members. And so different obstacles can create friction. And at the same time, those same obstacles can be overcome by just clear and consistent communication strategies. And so, for instance, virtual team members might schedule regular video calls that would help them foster a connection, or they would do things like communicate through shared online tools that help everyone stay informed about projects and deadlines. So when participating in a small group, individuals naturally adopt certain group roles. And this helps contribute to the group functioning. And so broadly speaking, these roles fall into three categories. First, there are task roles. And when there's a task role, we're talking about something that involves responsibilities that are directly related to completing the group's objectives. So maybe a member volunteers to do something like create a deliverable or an actionable item. That's something that is going to fall into the task role category. So that's one. Another one is a relational role. So that focuses on maintaining harmony and positive interactions among the members that are there. So, like if a member is there in a way that steps in and mediates the discussion and makes sure the right people get heard, or maybe resolves morale, or those are the things that you might find that are really beneficial with those relational roles. So task roles, relational roles, and the other one are individual-centered roles. And so individual-centered roles tend to come up when someone prioritizes their personal needs over the group's goals. And that can certainly undermine progress. But there are also times when you have folks who have an overwhelming goal that also falls in line with a team's goal. So like if you have a salesperson and that salesperson is part of the effort, and we can tend to see them more as an individual that does the slam dunk, right? And so they might be playing that individual role on the team. And so it's just that there are so many different dynamics. We also, in addition to just the types of roles that people play, we want to think about leadership, because sometimes leaders are within the team, sometimes they're external from the team. And there are a lot of different theories out there that explain what makes an effective leader. And I don't know, when I was in grad school, the leadership classes that I took, anything that began to list traits just really annoyed me, right? Because I know that, because someone has this particular trait, it doesn't necessarily equal that they're a great leader, right? Like because you're tall doesn't mean you're a great leader. Because you have charisma doesn't mean you're a great leader, right? So there are things out there that bother me. But the reason for that is that we know that early on, research in leadership did focus on what we call as trait theory. And trait theory is something that suggested that leaders possess an intrinsic trait like intelligence or confidence, like this thing that set them apart from others. And so more recent approaches and an understanding of human behavior really leaned on and helped us see that looking at leadership as a skill that can be learned is much more palatable. And we call the learning approach to leadership the functional theory view. And that functional theory view of leadership is going to argue that leadership varies based on what it is that the group needs at a given time. So, for example, at the start of a project, a leader might need to focus on building a clear kind of structure and assigning roles. But as the group progresses, that leader might shift to doing more work to empower members and foster collaboration. And another concept is shared leadership, where leadership responsibilities are begun to be more distributed across the group. And when that happens, it can allow members to contribute based on their unique strengths. And so I would say that a lot of times that we find those situations in particular scenarios where that flow is productive. I want to talk about style theory, because style theory is something that examines how leadership methods impact group functioning. So leaders may adopt an authoritarian style where They make decisions independently and dictate group strategies. And while that approach can be effective in high pressure scenarios like responding to an emergency, it also discourages creativity, and it doesn't allow for like a full collaboration, right? So a more inclusive approach comes from something we call democratic leadership. And democratic leadership is where input from the members can play a more central role in that decision making. And this style tends to enhance group satisfaction. As you can imagine, when you have an option for everyone in the group, their voice to be valued, then we understand one another, and it helps us not just see perspectives, but also understand that everyone is working towards the same goal. Sometimes you just see someone there and you don't really know how their actions are making an impact until you can participate with them in that kind of discussion. We contrast all of that with a leadership model called the laissez-faire leadership. And laissez-faire leadership is where the leader gives minimal direction and then allows the group to sort of make decisions. And this kind of style can work well if you have a self-motivated group, but also can lead to inefficiency without proper guidance. And that inefficiency that I can see would be people that begin to take roles in the group that don't best suit their skill set. And so sometimes it takes an external person to help show that. Leadership style also works to influence relationships within a group. So, for example, transformational leadership focuses on inspiring members through creating meaningful connection and shared vision. And so transformational leadership is something that is really required in most groups because we have to have a goal. So we're just adding or enforcing that connection when we're talking about the transformational leadership. And that's different from charismatic leadership. And charismatic leadership, instead of focusing on the goal, it focuses more on that leader motivating people towards the goal. So it's sort of like pushing versus pulling. And another effective approach is known as servant leadership. And a servant leader is someone that prioritizes the needs of the group instead of themselves. And so a servant leader would work to maybe strengthen relationships or motivate people behind the scenes, do things to help the group reach the goal that don't necessarily put them at the limelight. And so you can see that all these different categories of leadership and these different styles of thinking about approaches are all ways that help us think about groups, situations that you've been in and worked to, reach through productivity, right? One of the most foundational frameworks for solving problems in groups is something that's called Dewey's procedural model. I know that sounds really official, but Dewey's procedural model is something that provides a structured approach by breaking problems down into manageable steps. And it really helps avoid disorganization. And so in Dewey's model, one of the things that is done is the problem is broken apart and understood, and you figure out a plan for that. And so one of the first steps is to define that problem. And so defining the problem is really essential so that you can make sure that we understand what we're trying to fix. And then once we have dig into this and understood it, then we work to reframe the problem so it's as specific as possible so that we can figure out how to achieve that. And then we go through an analyzing stage, and during that analyzing stage, we're going to really thrive on open discussions and work to have members share their perspectives and build a thorough understanding, because we want to fully expose and understand what's going on. But at the same time, there's a danger here known as analysis paralysis. Have you heard of that? Because sometimes groups overanalyze every detail instead of advancing towards a solution, and that leads to frustrating delays. So to prevent this, we can do things like set time limits, or we can designate someone to guide discussions, but and still allow for meaningful analysis. So there are different ways that this can help. And then in Dewey's model, the third stage is brainstorming, and here is where group members generate as many potential solutions as possible without immediately evaluating them. And brainstorming is something that prioritizes creativity and out-of-the-box kinds of thinking. And so it works best in an environment where judgment is suspended and the group members can feel free to contribute without fear of criticism. Because after the brainstorming stage, the group is going to begin to evaluate some of those proposed solutions. And at that stage, ideas begin to be weighed against the specific criteria, like, is this feasible? What about the cost? Or does this align with long-term goals? And so imagining planning a big corporate event that aims to impress clients, but then realize you have to stick to a more modest budget. So in the end, some of the ideas in the brainstorming time that you thought were cheap or not good ideas, or that were overly creative, those might now be a good idea because the budget isn't there for anything else. And so, we want to appreciate those steps. And finally, as the group would work to implement whatever solution or whatever thing they're doing and monitor the progress, it really means that we have to be able to conduct regular reviews and watch to see if unforeseen challenges arise. In general, stay on track with the goals. And this is sort of an iterative aspect of Dewey's model. And it ensures flexibility, but still keeps the team grounded for their original purpose. And so these steps of opening up the box and analyzing it and working out the problem together in Dewey's system is somewhat can somewhat seem like it is going overboard when you talk about the breakdown. But when you work in a group, it's nice for everyone to be able to understand what's happening at what stage, right? Because if you're working through a problem and everyone, is in a mindset of understanding the problem, yet someone else is over here already pitching solutions to the problem, then you're going to really skip a lot that could be provided by the group, right? So that it's not like that idea is not going to still be there. It's just that that development process that the group can use is something that offers something from all those members, and that's why we might consider using a process like Dewey's system. Moving beyond structured models, another important factor in group problem solving is emotional intelligence. And this is a concept that was popularized by psychologist Daniel Goleman. And emotional intelligence is something that refers to the ability to understand and manage both your emotions and the emotions of others. And in the context of group dynamics, this skill is really valuable. So effective group interaction isn't just about exchanging information. It's about understanding and respecting each other on a deeper level. I want to bring up the part about group time that has to do with conflict, because conflict often does arise in group settings, but it's just that conflict itself isn't a problem. When you manage that conflict constructively, it can actually enhance the group outcome. And it does so by introducing diverse perspectives and sparking creative solutions. So, one useful framework for understanding conflict resolution is the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode instrument. And this is an instrument that I used 20 years ago in my first grad program doing analysis work, because it was a way for us to think about the conflict strategy that someone is using to deal with a situation. And so I might walk into a situation and I would choose to handle this by communicating a certain way. And so there are 5 different ways that the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode shares. One is competing, having a full competition, so competing. Another one is avoiding, turning your back altogether. Another one is accommodating, helping that person through. Another one is compromising, right? Each person gives a little bit. And the other one is collaborating, like sharing both. Everyone gets to share. So competing or avoiding or accommodating or compromising or collaborating, each of these approaches has its own strengths and weaknesses, and it just really depends on the situation. And collaboration, for instance, is considered one of the most effective strategies because it tries to integrate everyone's needs. But at the same time, achieving collaboration is something that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. And on the other hand, avoidance can be helpful in the short term. If tensions are running high and a cool-off period is needed, it's just maybe you have to leave issues unresolved so that you can make sure that, we imagine a cool-off period that might be needed, but just leaving issues unresolved might affect long-term group harmony. So imagine a group that has one member insisting on competing for resources, and another person that's working towards collaborating and offering to make the balance work. These kinds of approaches that people give, if either it be in communication within a group to get something done, or if you're in a situation where you are negotiating, understanding the different ways that the other person is handling it can help you decide about your own approach. And certainly, when I did my research, I was able to see that it really benefits you as a person to be able to choose based on the situation, based on what you need, which of the 5, competing or compromising, or in that situation, so that it's not best to just stick with one. And so if you have a personality style that is completely avoiding, then you are not really setting yourself up to be the best in every situation, right? So being able to be ready to be flexible is something that is a learned behavior, and it can really affect your ability to work in a group and be a leader of a group. Um, it's important to recognize that groups evolve as they work together. And there's a psychologist named Bruce Tuckman that provided a helpful framework for understanding these changes. Um, he created this model of group development that had 5 stages. You may have heard of these. The stages of a group coming together and working and completing their tasks are storming. I'm sorry. The first one is forming, then storming, norming, performing, and then adjourning. So when a group forms for the first time, members might feel reserved or unsure of their roles. And that leads to what Tuckman calls that forming stage, the first stage, because a group is coming together. So imagine a team meeting that's happening for the first time, and everyone's trying to figure out who does what and logistical details, and we get to know each other so we can see who's good at what. And so after that, then there's a storming stage. And so the storming stage happens when conflict and competing ideas begin to surface. And this is a stage that involves navigating secondary tensions like disagreements. And while storming can be challenging, it's a natural part of the group development. So making sure that everyone understands everything and everyone's ideas are out there. And so sometimes a lot has to get passed around and understood so that the best ideas can come to the top. And after that storming phase, which we expect to happen, we later would have a group that would settle into a normal kind of activity, and because they're sort of used to each other and used to their roles, and they know who's good at what. And so this norming stage is where we begin to trust people, and those roles become more clear of who's doing what. And so members are able to better align their goals, their personal goals to the group goals, and everything just becomes more clear. And this stage is where we are setting the stage for this performing stage. And the performing stage is when the group operates at its highest efficiency. And productivity peaks during this phase because you're in a position where individuals are able to cooperate seamlessly. But at the same time, projects end and groups have to be disbanded, right, at some point sometimes. And so there is an adjourning stage to everything where at the end, members are going to end up reflecting on their achievements and saying goodbye. And by understanding the evolution of group dynamics, members and leaders are able to anticipate the challenges that are going to happen with their groups, and then work to support their team through every stage in development. And altogether, small group communication does influence individuals and society. And so understanding the roles that folks play in teams, and also the leadership, both internal and external leaders, and group dynamics are all things that allow us to create a more productive and innovative system and team. So I do want to encourage you to reflect on what we talked about with small group communication, and consider how this applies to your experiences with the groups that you've been in. So thank you for your attention, and I hope you come away from this video with some practical tools to help your group communication skills.